Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen. Today we're joined by a new member of the LCS Analyst desk and one of the best writers in all of esports, Emily Rand. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I'm really glad to have you on. We haven't chatted for a while. I think in the first incarnation of this podcast, I had you on at one point, but it's been a pretty long time since we've officially done any content together or talked. What have you been up to in the past few months? It hasn't been very eventful, has it?
So the way that my contract worked with ESPN, and I know other people have talked about this too. So basically, when the vertical when they decided to shutter the vertical at ESPN where I was working, I was under contract through February 4th. And basically the idea is that I would continue to get paid, but I could not produce League of Legends content because it would still be under ESPN's purview. I'm not super mad about this either. It makes sense from a legal standpoint, especially if you're dealing with corporations and stuff. So I am not someone who is made of money. And so I didn't do a lot of League of Legends content, despite the fact that I was still watching as many games as possible. I tried to tweet as much about the Demacia Cup, for example, as possible, and the Kespa Cup and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I have not been able to do a lot of content until recently when I basically exited, we mutually parted ways, and now I am just technically freelance, yeah. So
yeah,
and also doing Analyst desk.
Yeah, so you joined the Analyst desk. You're going to be on in different segments, I guess, not all the time, not every day. It seems like they've got a bit of a rotating cast this time around, which is pretty interesting. I think cool to see. So you were on, I think, the first segment to start off the Lock In tournament, and you were on what, two of the show days?
I was on Countdown, and then the entire Analyst desk on Friday, and then I was on Countdown on Sunday.
What was that like? Was it really different from the stuff you've done before? Did you feel like it was any higher pressure?
Oh, it was way more pressure. Especially when I got my assignments and I was like, why are they having me lead the lock-in tournament? This is a terrible idea. But my own self-deprecation aside, that I cannot help sneak into everything, which is bad. You should not do it. I shouldn't do it either. It's obviously way more pressure because, I think one of my biggest flaws in terms of being an on-camera person is that I try to add too much context or talk too much about things when you need to be a lot more concise and really precise with your language. So hopefully, as I continue to get more reps in with the Analyst desk and with Countdown, that will come. And I know there are people on the right side that are really willing to help me with that, which is good. So yeah, I was really terrified. I think it went pretty well. I think I could have been better. I actually think it could have been a lot better, but as a debut, I think it wasn't bad, which is more, better than I expected, I guess.
Yeah, I thought you did great. I think a lot of people really enjoyed your time on there, and we're happy to see you on there in the first place. I'd be kind of curious what your heart rate was doing, because I know for my part, I haven't done anything nearly that high pressure yet, but the Evil Geniuses free agency show that I was on, my heart rate for that entire 3-4 hours was just through the roof, absolutely maxed out the entire time.
Yeah, so we were talking about sleep earlier, off camera, and I don't usually sleep a lot anyway, but what happened was I couldn't sleep the night before, which is fine, so I was watching LPL. And then the where I should be napping, post show, pre getting up for LPL, I just couldn't sleep because I was on a performance high. Yeah. Which, honestly, the thing I could compare it to the most, which is probably a really dumb comparison, but I did a lot of musical theater when I was in high school. And that's actually what it reminded me of the most, right? You do so much prep that people don't see off camera, and you're just constantly, like you're working up to this, you're practice, and then you get on and your mind just goes blank and it goes, and then afterwards you're just kind of left on this like high until you crash. Yeah. I don't know if it's like that for other people, but that's what it was like for me.
No, it's like that for me, for sure. Well, let's get into some actual League of Legends discussion and content here. I think, obviously, we had the opening week of Lock In. There's been a lot of other stuff too, but I'd really love to kind of hone in on LCS. I think that's what being, a member of the LCS Analyst desk, and I focus a lot on North America. I think that's what people really want to talk about. And I mean, the big story to me was Evil Geniuses, right? I came in and I had kind of, I'd say, modest expectations for them. I thought they could do pretty well, especially in this tournament. A lot of veteran players who are going to probably not need a whole lot of time to ramp up, but man, did they look good.
Yeah, so I think they still made a lot of mistakes, but I think the thing that impressed me the most, and I've said this elsewhere, I said this on the analyst desk, I believe I said it to a few people in the Hotline League chat a few days ago. But the thing that really impressed me the most about EG was definitely the coordination that they had in team fighting. And especially in that first game where my expectations, I think, were similar to yours, where it was like moderate, kind of like, okay, I don't really know what to expect from this team. They might be good, they might be terrible, depending on synergy. This is a tournament where I know people are having a ton of hot takes about it, but I treat it like Demacia Cup, or I treat it like Kespa Cup, where I'm just looking at how a roster is looking at the patch, what's their synergy looking like. This is lower stakes chance to try stuff out. And the thing that impressed me the most about EG was the fact that their team fighting was like surprisingly well coordinated. I think part of that is because they, for example, everyone's talking about impacts of Renekton. There's a team fight topside in their first game where it's such a perfect visual example of what Impact brings to a team fight. He has this flank where he like basically waits out. He comes in like at the perfect time, where if he'd come in earlier, maybe they still would have won, but it just wouldn't have been as dominant. Like, this was the team fight that kind of shut everything down. EG was already ahead. I think Jizuke had in that game a really good understanding of the range of his stun, and that was actually super necessary for that team fight composition to work. So that's the thing that impressed me the most, actually. It was like, I was like, okay, I did not expect this team to be this well coordinated in their fights. So any other mistakes that they made in laning phase or in early rotations, I think the team fighting and skirmishing that they showed more than made up for it.
Yeah, and I think Impact plays a pretty big role in that, playing his Renekton and being able to, I think, by coming out of the lane stronger and ahead, he had that much ability to kind of position himself on the map where he wanted. Like, he would have the first control of the wave, so he could get into the right flank position. Before that, he could be contributing to setting up the vision in the place he wanted. And like, he really did control a lot of that game through his team fighting presence. From what I saw, there's actually the Run It episode this week is going to be all about Impact. And one of the things that I throw in there at the end of it is looking at a couple of the things about his stats as a Renekton compared to what we normally see out of Renektons, and way less farming, but a lot more damage, because he played it entirely to like set up for those team fights and influence the team fights and get right in the middle of things. And he's always been an amazing team fighter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been a strength of his. Like, if you look at where people can kind of like more heavily criticize Impact, I think it's in his champion pool, and occasionally in his laning. But I think, I guess he makes mistakes in lane like anyone else, but I actually think he's like a pretty solid laner, especially in some of these losing matchups. Obviously, again, depending on champion matchup and pick. But I like that you touched upon top lane just more generally, because I actually think across multiple regions, like, we always joke that top lane is an island, but I actually think the top lane matchup has become pretty important to look at in terms of the way teams are playing the map, even if it's, oh, you need to get first push topside because we're going to be doing a dive on bot side where the jungler is like pathing down and we're trying to get our bot lane ahead. And that's actually been super important, I think, across all regions. I've seen teams both struggle and have success with it in LPL. I actually think it's one of the reasons why EDG is doing pretty well right now is because they've actually been kind of pathing towards topside first, making sure Flandre is ahead, and then Flandre can TP down for some of those bot lane dives. And I think that is another thing that EG seemed to understand. Again, I don't think the execution was always perfect, but I think they did understand like how to use impact in that top lane to affect the rest of the map, in addition to team fights, which was cool. Like it's cool to see. I guess like a lot of people are always stuck on LCS and being like, well, LCS makes like so many mistakes. And I do believe that's true. Like I think people should kind of accept that as like a default baseline. But then putting that aside, I think it's really interesting to always, if you can see visually the setup that people are trying to go for, then you can kind of pick apart what they're doing a little bit better. And I also think you could definitely see what EG were going for. And when they did execute it really well, it looked great.
Yeah, for sure. How did you feel about Jizuke's contributions to what they did in the week overall? Like you mentioned him knowing his Syndra ranges really well and using that. I think he had some pretty good some situations both where he contributed to an engage, but also to some disengages and preventing Cloud9 from making their comp be able to combo the way they wanted. We also did see a few moments where it was kind of classic 2020 Jizuke, just kind of randomly get caught and die. What did you think of the way he played overall? Was he one of the highlights to you or one of the lowlights? Or
I mean, neither. I think people tend to like separate Jizuke into like. We joked about this with Bin last year. I joked about this with Bin, the senior top laner, with my friends, where it was like the duality of Bin. Either he'll like pop off or he'll suck. I think people see Jizuke in a really similar way. But I also think the way that he was used last year was really like EG was like, you are the side lane person, where your job is to be the side lane distraction while the rest of the team does something so we can leverage it for, to trade objectives or whatever. And when that wasn't always working for them, they were like, okay, we'll bring in someone who's like a quote unquote, like more control mid person, which, I don't think that's necessarily a fair assessment of him, but I think that's kind of what he's been pigeonholed into in the community. I thought he was like fine. He had really good, he had some really great moments. And I think the big thing with Jizuke that people have always said about playing with him is that he has a really good understanding of what's going on the map, even if it doesn't necessarily show in his play style. I hope that they continue to keep up this kind of team fighting, skirmishing look, because I really like it. I don't know if, again, that's just because I have LPL brain, but I also feel like if they're communicating with him that well, and you have like both Impact and Jizuke controlling these team fights, that it is basically allowing for Deathly to just, really, really pop off. And I think he was kind of the point person that everyone was looking at and being like, well, we don't know about Deathly. He's kind of bad. And the fact that they set up so well for him this past week allowed him to pop off, right? So I thought that was also really cool to see. And so if Jizuke and Impact are communicating with the rest of the team and they keep going for these like kind of team fight skirmishes, I really like the way that EG is looking.
Yeah, and I think Ignar plays a really big role in that too, like being such a good engaged player and somebody who loves to get out on the map and join those skirmishes and lead those skirmishes, but then also, be a team fight engager and all of that. Then that creates these situations where Deathly just has to fill in the gaps behind it, right? Which is, I think, exactly what you kind of want out of a team fighting bot laner, somebody you don't want to put too much pressure on. He doesn't have to smash the 2v2s. He doesn't have to like make big flashy plays of his own. Just fill in all the space that Impact, Jizuke, Ignar are going to create for you. And you're gonna don't throw. That's kind of all they're gonna ask from him.
Yeah, and I think the true test for Deathly is going to come in season, especially when I presume just because this is, I feel like where Ignar is best, that I presume they're going to try to be unlocking him from lane to go roam around on some of these like tanky initiators that are really, really in meta right now. Like it's a great meta. I pointed this out as a great meta for Sword Art. It's a great meta for Ignar. And so the big test for definitely is going to be like, okay, how do you do it? You know, how do you do in the 1v2? Like how gracefully can you kind of hold lane? So that'll be the big test for him in terms of like how he manages bot wave and bot lane pressure, and when when Ignar roams. That's another thing that I'll be looking at from EG going into the regular season.
And I think also the more they end up facing teams that want to play through the bot side, I think there are, a lot of teams. Historically, it's been almost all of the teams that wanted to play through bot side almost all the time, and I think that's shifting up a little bit, and that's really good. But, when you come up against Tactical and Core JJ, and they're like, we just want to, crush through the bottom lane and control the bottom side of the map, and they make it hard for Ignar to even get out of lane in the first place, seeing how they handle that is going to be really important to me, too. I think, EG do have probably the best weak side top laner in the league. They can try to play through the bot side as well, but I don't know if that's really, like, I think that's one of the interesting things for me about what holds EG back from being a top 3 in the league contender is, okay, maybe they can start to play through Ignar or through Impact, on the top side and play through him in lane, but then and leave definitely on the weaker side of it. But I think it's better to let Impact be playing the weak side. But do you really want to make your bot lane your strong side when you have definitely, like, I don't know, it's a little weird to me how they're going to balance all of that out. So that's one thing that I think the more coordinated the teams get, the more practice they get. Seeing how that dynamic plays out on the team is going to be definitely very, I'm curious how they're going to balance it.
I think that's also, to touch upon a point I made earlier, I think that's also where how is Impact going to affect the bot side of the map through teleport timings, because if they keep putting him in favorable matchups, he can get the push top side first, and then you path downward and you go for a bot lane dive. So that is another way that they can kind of leverage him. Obviously, it still has to be a good meta for Impact, because I think if there is one thing that you can, like the major criticism you can levy against him is that his champion pool is not always a meta, and he's just going to look a lot better on certain champions than others. So right now, where he is in a good spot with his champion pool, I think you can leverage that topside pressure into making sure that definitely can get ahead in bot lane and then unlock Ignar. Like, there's definitely a run of play that works really well for them that way.
Sure. Yeah, and then Svenskeren, I think, didn't show up the best in 2020. Seems like he's doing okay so far. I've had a hard time reading kind of what to think of him lately, what to expect from him. What did you think of the way he played this weekend? Because I didn't really get a really clear sense of what to think from him.
I mean, I think Svenskeren is like someone who, how do I put this? Is that one he's like overrated or underrated? I hate both of those. I think Svenskeren can be really, which you could say about a lot of junglers, whatever. I think Svenskeren is going to be really good if he has strong coordination with his team, which sounds like kind of a cop-out answer, but I think if he is happiest, it's when he can actually kind of farm up on, for example, a champion like Graves, as opposed to being in lanes like permanently all the time.
Yeah.
And I think if you have a team like EG that seems to be a little bit more focused on like team fight coordination, if you can figure out that early game part where you do just kind of let Svenskeren farm up to Mythic, I think that's actually, again, a really good setup for this EG team to succeed. I don't know if the meta will stay that way,
Yeah.
It's not that I think Svenskeren is like bad at interacting with his lanes. I just think it seems like, based on his history, the preferred state for him is to kind of use that farming style and then use his advantage in skirmishes and team fights.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's me mischaracterizing him, but like that's what I have seen over the past few years.
Yeah, I think like if you go back a little further, what I saw out of Svenskeren like in his MVP season when he was at his best was when he could really path defensively a lot of the time. When he could recognize, okay, the enemy team is setting up for this play, so I'm going to path in a way that I arrive to counter that play, so that either they can't pull the trigger on it at all, or they try and I just like counter gank it or whatever it is. And usually that meant Sneaky is farming under his own tower and Svenskeren is protecting him from a dive. And that worked out really well for Cloud9 because Sneaky was usually farming under his own tower. And so, that some of that stems from Svenskeren. I think a lot of it stems from the team around him, and some of it comes from the meta as well. But I'd like to see him be able to a little more about, you can still have that farming up to 6 and covering the enemy plays, and being a little bit more of a counterpather in a sense. But I like to see, I personally prefer the style where you're applying more forward pressure, and when you're pathing to create and earn something rather than to deny something. I appreciate both, but I've seen a little bit more of the denial pathing from Svenskeren when he's at his best, and I'm curious whether that's going to be true on EG or whether it's going to be something else. That's the way I've seen it. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens the rest of the tournament with EG. How they continue to work together. At a certain point, that's the rest of the teams might kind of catch up to them, or maybe they won't. We'll find out. I think another team to move the topics along here a little bit. Another team that to me impressed, but not in a similar, not on a similar scale maybe because they started from a different point of expectations. But Golden Guardians came in. Everybody's saying this team's going to be 10th. And they did not look like a 10th place team whatsoever.
I mean, I guess my like hot take there is like I still think that it's gonna even out, and they probably will be a 10th place team. But
come on,
I think I know I'm mean. I actually love GGS, GG now, not GGS. I think the cool thing about Golden Guardians that I really loved about their play this past week, and I said this on Countdown and Analyst Desk, but I'll reiterate it here. I feel like too many rookies that come into LCS have really hesitant playstyle or default to this kind of passivity that, in my opinion, kind of plagues North American League of Legends generally. And I, even if you are dying because you're diving tier 1 and it just doesn't work out for you, like, you know what, Niles, like, I appreciate that you went for that. Like, I actually really, really do, because hopefully the next time you know how to execute it better. Like you're never going to learn if you're not that aggressive. And I feel like there's always this push-pull in coaching and NA, I guess, where I've overheard conversations about this at Scouting Grounds when I was kind of a fly on the wall. But it's like, what do we teach these players? Like, do we want to facilitate the fact that they're, playing really, really recklessly, and that's not optimal? Do we want to curb that and be like, okay, no, like now you reset, now you do this, now you do this, now you do this, and have a set plan, and then what happens is when the people don't follow that plan, players get kind of lost? Or do you just kind of want to let them make these mistakes and encourage that kind of proactivity and see what happens? And I think, I know I brought this up on Desk as well, but for people that didn't hear it, I actually liked their Camille Gallio pick. I've liked their drafting, not because it's like objectively good. Like in the TSM game, I actually think TSM's draft was better, and as long as TSM was able to scale enough and or set up around objectives first, they were kind of always going to win that. But this draft, which was Camille, Talia, Galio, Kalista, and Thresh, I think it tells them what they need to do. It still tells the opponent what they're going to do, but for a team that is this young and or this lacking in professional experience, with the exception of Stixay and actually Newbie, which people should know, he has won, I believe, 3 domestic titles. This tells me like, okay, we're facilitating Niles. Iconic is responsible for interacting with his lanes early, particularly on top side. And, we know how our team composition is going to work. And so I like this for Golden Guardians specifically, even though it's, in my opinion, objectively worse than what TSM had, if that makes sense. Like my goal is to try to talk about draft in a more context-based way in terms of what this team can succeed with and what this team might want to do and who are the players on this team. So even though this is pretty telegraphed in terms of what they want to do, I like that for them because it's easy for them to execute. It can help improve their synergy. I think it makes the most of, like a Ablazeolive paying attention to his side lanes. It makes the most of Iconic, who honestly was not on my radar as much as Niles was, but definitely now is. We're going to facilitate Niles in the top lane because he's a really aggressive laner. So I loved this coming out of them. And I think if there's one thing that I could give Golden Guardians credit for, it's that they really took like a great approach to this tournament. And they're like, we're going to pick things that we know we can execute. We're going to make the most of the pieces that we have and the way we think we should play. And I like that they actually seem to have an identity coming into this, which is definitely something that I did not expect.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here. From the draft side, I mean, the Golden Guardians TSM draft, I think one was pretty polarizing. I actually, my perspective on it was I really didn't like TSM's approach to that draft because it gave away a lot of active control of the game. And it would, and I totally get, like, I think Kelsey and I had a bit of an exchange on Twitter about it, and her point being, it's not at all.
I think Kelsey and I agree on this. So
yeah,
just warning you.
Absolutely, but I think the conversation itself is pretty interesting because my take was the Golden Guardians draft had the opportunity to be actively controlling the game. We're the ones who are going to get ahead in the lane phase, and as long as we do everything correctly, we're going to be the ones kind of in control of the game from there. And on the TSM side, it's, but the moment you make a mistake, we outscale you and we win. And so I just personally, I guess it's a little bit of a stylistic thing. I don't like having a comp where we need one mistake from you and then we win because you're saying we need you to make a mistake, right? Or at least we need you to play to some lower level of efficiency or optimization. And that's just like a mentality thing, I think, mostly. But it's completely fair to say, but every team is going to make at least one mistake, and especially a team of young players. So as long as we outscale, like, I completely get that perspective too. And I think it's a fair perspective, especially given the team they were playing against. But I do give, I think, a lot of credit to Golden Guardians for drafting a comp that was kind of like, in a way, I think difficult to play in the sense that we can't make any mistakes or we're going to lose this thing. And I think it's a lot easier really with a team of young players to go in and say, like, we're going to play the comp that is like, everybody press R at the same time. Just don't throw. We'll all press R, and easy to execute kind of thing. And that gives you less room to grow and learn, I think.
Well, I mean, wait, how is Golden Guardians also not press R comp? Because it's Galio.
Because to me the best way to play that comp was through the side lanes in, like, not necessarily a hardcore 1-3-1, but split pushing. And I thought the big mistake Golden Guardians made that game was allowing the game to be turned into neutral objective fights. I think taking dragon fights was their mistake that cost them all the tempo they had. They could have just traded dragons for side lane towers and extended their gold lead and won before the soul became relevant. That was what I wanted to see them do in that game that they didn't do. I didn't think it was execution in the team fights that was the problem.
Yeah, but, I mean, I think so my thing about this TSM comp and the reason why I think it's better is because I think this is probably where Kelsey and I are in agreement. Even outside of looking at the team comp, like in lanes or whatever, if this composition sets up around a fight, it's just really hard, even with all of the engage that Golden Guardians have, for them to like break that setup. So I mean, I also understand why they went. See, I keep thinking about how awesome the Jin Maokai combination is, and so now I just want everyone to pick it. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, maybe if Sword Art had gone Imperial Mandate Maokai in this game too, but no, I just really love that team setup. Anyway, that is
and I do think that the Callista was a bit of a problem with that Golden Guardians comp, because I think having more wave clear mid and a little more range there probably would have been more beneficial to the way I wanted to see them play the comp. So I think there's a little bit of a, that was one kind of difference in kind of what their theme of their comp was relative to what I was thinking it should be. But in general, I think Golden Guardians did like give themselves some things that they had to execute on. I think they did fairly well. I earlier on you were talking about Niles and like playing with confidence and, taking some risks. It was interesting because I actually interviewed him earlier this week, and you can go on. Yeah, you can go on the YouTube channel and you can watch that. And one of the things he said is he thought he didn't play with quite enough confidence. And there were some times he used the phrase, like referring to playing against Alfari specifically, that that he didn't take some of the chances he could have, and I should just kill people when they're inting. He said, like, he should have the confidence that even though he's playing Alfari, hey, he felt like Alfari was inting in a couple of cases, he should just jump in and kill him. Which I'm like, okay, because my previous interactions with Niles have been like mega confidence, and he thinks he's one of the best top laners in North America, and for him to be taking this a little more like, I was playing too humble, was pretty interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw in I believe it was the TL game, which was heavily in TL's favor by the end of it. But I think the thing that struck me the most about Golden Guardians, and the reason why I think they still could be a 10th place team, no flame, because I'm actually I'm super excited about them, and I really love this team, and I loved their approach this week, is that, and this is something they'll learn with more practice, right? But with any young team, you see them get into a situation that they just have not been in before. And so they don't necessarily know how to set up for it. And I honestly wish I could remember the exact point in the game that this happened. I think it was maybe around a Herald fight. I was watching this game with Raz, and he just said immediately, like, oh no, they've never been in this position before, so they don't know what to do here. And next time they'll know a little bit better what to do, and then the next time they'll know a little bit more what to do. And so I think if there's something to really look forward to with Golden Guardians, it's seeing that like incremental improvement every week, because with every different look that this team gets at a game state, they can learn from it, and you'll be able to see that visually across the entire LCS, hopefully. So that's what I'm super excited about for this team, and looking at like their development and the individual players' development.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of development and players who can develop, I think, we saw a lot of young or like inexperienced players coming in and getting their first reps. Who are the ones that stood out to you the most? We've talked about Niles and Iconic already, but aside from those guys, who really jumped out to you as like the most interesting new faces of the first weekend?
Yeah, so Iconic definitely. Ablazeolive, I thought was pretty interesting to watch as well. I think they're looking, the way they're looking at him in terms of looking at translating whatever he's doing in mid to side lane pressure, which seemed like the way they wanted to play around him, I thought was really interesting. So I know like he's obviously done really, really well in Academy. So he was already on a lot of people's radars, but I'm looking at him. And then obviously the other big one that we kind of touched upon with the Analyst desk, just because he came in with, I guess, comparatively low expectations, and the team came in with like no expectations because they don't have their full roster, was Revenge. And if you look at even the games that IMT lost, I think the big kind of heartening thing for them, I guess, is that their two solo laners looked if not like outright good, at least like, okay, we know that these two are going to be the focus of
there's
the
something
way
there,
this
right?
this team works. Yeah. And so in that regard, I think Revenge played a lot better compared to general expectations of him. And then Insanity is someone that I've always really liked, honestly, just because he plays lane so much like his namesake. And I know a lot of people probably remember some of the ill-timed, quirky packages from last year. But I do appreciate how aggressive he can be in lane. And I know everyone's going to point to that turret dive that he didn't get and turned into a Jisuke double kill. But I think I think again, like I really appreciate that from him, and both him and Revenge were obviously Insanity is not a rookie because he played last year, but I'm looking at these two when I look at IMT and I'm like, okay, this is looking more interesting to me than what I initially thought from this team.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really hope, and I think a lot of people should be thinking about, is when we see these plays from the less experienced players and they come in and they do something that, you know, is a bit of a risk-taking thing, maybe makes them look a little silly if it doesn't work, don't harp on those, right? And I think that's something that has happened a lot in the past, that we find the mistakes or we find the risks that don't play out, and the younger players or the less experienced players kind of get memed on for that, and it anti-snowballs against them in fan sentiment and whatever else, rather than just, you know, giving them some leeway, celebrating the things that did work out, kind of even applauding them for having that mentality, and like cheering them on, like encouraging them in it. And I think if we want to, as a content creation community and as a fan base, celebrate the LCS for bringing in these younger players and looking more towards the future, then we need to be ready to kind of gloss over some of those less happy looking little moments and focus more on the positive things and try to tell those stories more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion about narrative just generally going from this offseason into LCS this year. I'm not really sure why. Like, I feel like it's always a discussion, but for some reason, it's been more of a discussion this past year, or this past offseason, rather. And I think this is also where the whole, like, LCS sucks, is the worst major region, et cetera, comes in, because I do feel like if you're looking at LCS compared to the other major regions, it has actual physical barriers that are exist, and you have to take that into consideration. If it's specifically just the ping on the server and the fact that the US just generally is like such a massive country land mass wise, that it would behoove Riot to have multiple servers because of that, but we don't. And I think you do have to accept that you're already working with, like, people who are saying like the level of play in LCS is significantly worse. Yes, but like I'm not sure what pointing that out does. Like if you accept that as a baseline, then you can move forward and look at, well, okay, if we accept that, then how are these players improving from that? You know, like what are we doing to, you know, foster our native talent, which has been another major discussion and narrative going into this. You know, what are we looking at if we're already working from and accepting that baseline level? Okay, now what's the next step? And that's what I want to see people talking about more than like X person messed up this combination, because let's be real, like, and I hear this all the time from coaches too. It's like pointing that out to a player, they already know they screwed up, and they already know where they screwed up. So it's kind of pointless to be like, you screwed up here, because it's not something they don't know already. And to touch back to, I guess, to come full circle on like what I really want to see from a team like Golden Guardians, for example, I'll consider that a success if I can look at these games in the lock-in tournament and them like midway through the season and be like, hey, they were in this situation all the way back here, right? And now they're in a similar situation and they learned how to improve. Or, you know, Insanity is in a similar matchup And this time he gets the kill under turret and is able to back off and juggle aggro correctly and land all his abilities and have a better understanding of the range and stuff like that. You know, so sorry, this is like a really rambling answer, but it's something that I see a lot of people point out in the community, and it's worth keeping in the back of your head, but also it doesn't necessarily help it when you're talking about how can North America improve, because I do think we're obviously working at a lower baseline level, but then from there you should start talking about, okay, so now what can we do with what we do have? And if there's one thing I guess I hope that I can do on the LCS broadcast, it's that, with the help of obviously like people like you, people like Kelsey who really care about the development of North American talent that we already have in the scene.
Yeah, and I think I think another way to look at that or to talk about that is, rather than trying to focus on a player's level of play, especially if they're less experienced player, you want to focus on their trajectory, right? You want to focus on, are they better than they were before? Are they continuing to get better? Are they improving over time, right? And I think a lot of the times in the past, we've had rookie players come in who didn't look good in the first month and a half, 2 months, even a full split. And we're just kind of like, well, that's not working. We got to stabilize somehow. We can't afford to lose these games, and they just never get their shot again. There have been players who had like 4 games and that was it, right? And there's a difference between, there are players who might get a few games because it wasn't intended for them to get those games in the first place. Like, they were just a little band-aid while Plan A was still coming through. But there are others who seemed like, hey, we're going to develop this player, and then panic mode, pull them out, like, oh no. And I think that's a big hope, especially with, I think, the new format this year where Spring Split, continues on into Summer Split, and you have a lot more opportunity for each individual game to not like tank your whole season. Hopefully that gives teams a little more breathing room, and also the mindset shift of giving these players an actual opportunity to play out the year. And as long as they're showing the right trajectory, you can continue to invest in them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every younger player needs to be, held on to, and like, no, they can still, like, if they're showing the wrong trajectory, you sometimes do still have to move on from them. I'm not going to call anybody out, but there have been players like that where, like, okay, they seem like they're getting better, and now for the last 4 months, they've just been getting worse and worse, and okay, it's time for us to move on. But I think trajectory is really the thing people need to look at and compare, like, and you're going to get a lot better read of that if you're inside the team, hopefully. But from the outside, we can still try to talk about it.
Well, and so many of these prevailing narratives have been decided after like 1 or 2 games. And, that is really tough when, for example, you are called up, presumably before you're like truly LCS ready, and or it would behoove the team to actually keep you in academy for maybe a little bit longer to get more experience. But no, you're pushed up because this team is losing and they need to swap something out, and then you don't perform as well as expected, and then suddenly people are just thinking that you're bad for the rest of your career. I think Saligo is someone that this has happened to. I think Fake God, not as much, but kind of similarly is someone that this has happened to, where people have kind of decided that the narrative around them is that they were not LCS ready, but that also means that they're not good. And I know Alarim spoke on this on the analyst desk. I think it's a point that's really worth reiterating and like super important, and he would know. So I'm paraphrasing what he said, but basically there is a world of difference between being called up because the LCS team is doing badly and you need to make a change because you need to win. And they're just like, okay, academy team, it's your time, or like it's your time. You're being called in to be this kind of like Band-Aid over a giant wound, and it's not a situation that is particularly great for setting up a young player for success or instilling confidence in them. And the point that Aller made is that it's a world of difference between, we are saying you are the team that we're starting with, you are the players that we're starting with, we are giving you the practice that you need. Like, even just getting like those reps in scrim preparing for this tournament makes a world of difference in how a player feels about themselves and about their performance and about how the team is approaching them being on a roster. And I think that cannot be understated either.
Absolutely. on the other hand, you get players who are promoted into a situation where everything is set up for them to succeed and look great. And then you have to judge how well they do with that. And we've had players who looked really well with
Yeah.
that. But obviously, the player that I think a lot of people came in, and I have definitely contributed to the hype narrative here, but he's also contributed to hyping himself a lot higher than maybe was wise, is Fudge, who's been put into a situation on Cloud9 where he, I don't think you could be in a much better spot to succeed as an individual player and to help you look good. But there was a lot of, I think, community sentiment going the other direction, whether it's a reaction to him talking himself up so much and being so cocky coming in, whether it's just that expectations were set so high from people talking about him being the best player coming out of Academy. What did you think of the way he actually looked, though? Like, was he as bad as Twitch chat seemed to think he was?
I don't think so. I think a lot of it kind of has to do, like, maybe some of it was nerves, but I think a lot of it still has to do with actual matchup. And the fact that, like, for example, I think this is another place where we can kind of talk about community narrative. In the first game, obviously, he didn't look great, but they were also attacking topside from the get-go, right? Because that's a winning matchup for Impact. And as we discussed already with EG, part of the reason why this team composition worked and what they were trying to do is actually play through topside, have Impact be more of a carry. Like, I know people were joking about, like, oh, we're seeing SKT Impact again. And even if, like, yeah, he's not going to be like, oh my gosh, main carry Impact. Obviously, he was carrying these team fights through his engages and his CC and just his knowledge of where to enter and how to flank and all this kind of stuff. And one of the reasons is that he got significantly ahead, right? Like, wasn't he like dirty farming turret?
Yeah,
after,
I was going to say,
kill?
like when you've got the enemy top laner, proxy farming you between towers while his jungler is on your Krugs, like something has gone wrong with not just you yourself as the top laner. Like, this is not, oh, the top laner is so bad he's getting proxy farmed. It's like, okay, something on the map overall here is wrong that you did not want to happen. And you can't look at the individual top laner who's getting proxy farmed on and say, like, oh, he threw this so bad. Like, which is not to say he was laning the best he could have. But this is an overall map state situation, not a 1v1 state.
Yeah, and I think that kind of overshadowed. So, like, that game, the microcosm of that game definitely, I feel like, overshadowed his entire weekend performance. I feel like when people think of Fudge's performance, they think of the Renekton just dirty farming the wave. So, that is something that's going to affect the way that people look at him. Do I think it's the debut he wanted? Obviously not. I think when you're also looking at the C9 team, what I'm really curious about is how the mid-jungle matchup is going to go. And I think that's going to significantly affect how Fudge plays and what they want to do with him. I mean, just comparing the way they were playing to the way EG was playing, EG went into this game, again, as we talked about, with a specific understanding of, like, how they want to facilitate Impact into playing some of these team fights, and how they want to transfer any pressure that he got topside into affecting the rest of the map. Whereas I didn't see a similar kind of understanding of what they want to do with their team composition from C9. And I think C9 is just, like, coming together, right? Like, they're figuring out how they want to play. And that's exactly what this tournament is for. So I know we know how much Perks' buyout is or whatever. And I know people are going to always rag on Sword Art and Perks because we know how much they got paid. But I think the C9 team is honestly going to be fine. All they have to do is figure out how they want to play around mid-jungle. And then I think Sven and Vulcan refreshed people's memories in terms of how good of a bot lane they are. So this is a scenario where if you're looking at C9, maybe they're not looking for Fudge to do what EG did with Impact here and transferring a ton of topside pressure to bot. Instead, they're going to rely on other spots on the map and then have Fudge come in later in team fights and skirmishes. And that's from their draft. That's kind of how it's looking like how they want to play it. It's also just not a bad way to ingratiate a player into a veteran lineup core like this. especially with the addition of Perks, who I think is still a player who's incredibly good, guys. I know people are loving dunking on Perks, but he is still a phenomenal player. So I think A, this roster will be fine, and B, I think they'll try to find a role for Fudge that's more that, as opposed to something like we saw from Golden Guardians, where they're just like, you're it, Niles. Like, you play top lane super aggressively, and we're going to use that to our advantage because it works for us. C9 doesn't have to do that because they have this like incredibly stellar roster, behind them that already has a lot of competitive experience. So that's another important thing that I kind of want to look at when I'm looking at Fudge's performance. Again, I don't think he had the debut he wanted. I don't think he played like super, super well, but I also think he got camped and he's being used in a different way.
Yeah. And I think they will find opportunities to let him, win some matchups and carry some games down the road, maybe even within this tournament. And I think that's one of the great luxuries Cloud9 have, is that they can play pretty much any compositional style or whatever, given the players they have, the flexibility they have. But you don't need to throw him into that role right off the bat. And you don't need to, rag on him if he gets put in a different kind of a role than you were maybe hoping, and and whatever it is though. So, and I also think on the Perks front, especially in that first game, the one that people are the most ready to jump on him about, he was just trying to style on an A, I think, and I think he'll recognize that he can't just style on an A and like pick Yone and like win skirmishes that he has no right to win. Like his button pressing isn't that much better than everybody else here. And I think, to me, that was the main thing I took away from that game is, okay, Perks, chill out a little bit. Like, win by actually being better, not by thinking you're better. So we'll see if that changes.
Also, I will say for people who are saying that Perks is like I say that Blabber and Perks need to figure out their mid-jungle synergy, and I actually think it's super important for this team to work that they need to figure that out. But also, people who are saying that Perks can't, as a mid laner, play for the rest of the map and play for side lanes.
Yeah, that's not true.
That's just not true. I mean, I rarely say like something is just objectively not true, but in this case, like his understanding of side lanes is actually like super good. And he's really good at roaming. We saw him even roaming from bot lane on things like the Yasuo. I think once he gets the synergy with this team, they will be able to figure out a mid jungle that works for them and helps facilitate Blabber, because I know that's something that people have been kind of harping on with like, well, Niski helped the team. And he was really focused on the Doinby style of pushing forward and then going to side lanes, which, I mean, I have a weird mental hang up with the way that people boil down Doinby's playstyle, but putting that aside, I think Perks can play to the map really well. And so even if you haven't seen it yet, I think we've seen it in his play previously.
Well, and I think sometimes that aspect of Perks' play gets judged a little by the direct comparison to Caps, because they both played the same role on that team at different times. But the times when Perks was playing mid, meta might have been a little different for some things. And also, I think Caps was a lot more of a player willing to completely sell out his lane to do things for the other lanes, whereas Perks was a little bit more on the standard. But if your comparison on how much you're willing to sacrifice your lane to play the map is you versus Caps, I don't think that's a standard comparison, right? Because Caps does not a standard style on that. Caps also is very, very map active. But that doesn't mean like Perks can play all of those styles, no problem. And I think they'll figure that out just fine.
Also, can I just say, as a tangentially related composition execution point, the quote unquote Doinby style, in my opinion, and I know Kelsey and I have ranted about this, I believe, on other content that we've done together, but a lot of it relies on mid jungle synergy because of the way that you're resetting mid wave. And so if there's one thing that I would just love to encourage people to look at when you're looking at how well a mid laner plays the map for his team, pay attention to when they are pushing that wave, when they are crashing that wave, when they're denying creeps from the enemy mid laner, and most importantly, when the jungler is coming to path through mid to help reset that wave.
Mm-hmm.
Just to throwing it out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to that, right? And I think it takes a lot of learning of what to look for and how to look at it, and things like that. But yeah, I can't wait to see how the rest of the tournament goes. What other teams kind of, whether the teams that have looked good so far continue to look good, whether some others kind of jump in. I think we're going to have some players arriving that are going to shift things up a little bit. I believe Santorin's going to be playing with Team Liquid. I think there are a couple other players who are coming in, but I don't know all of the details on that. So we'll have to see. Let's finish things off here a little bit. Did have a question come in from Zol24, who's wondering whether you believe that, referring a little bit back to what we were talking before, the starting level of the LCS and wanting to see NA League of Legends improve. Do you believe that based on the way things have gone with the LCS recently, should the LCS lose a first seed, or not be able to get that first seed pool in Worlds consistently going forward?
I mean, I kind of hate the seeding. I kind of hate the seeding at Worlds anyway, because I think so much is decided by placement when the bracket draw is kind of busted. Yeah. Like, for example, we saw, basically a Chinese side of the bracket and a South Korean side of the bracket with like the EU teams sprinkled in between. And I would have liked to see that mixed up a lot more. And I think we may have seen some different results. I've said this elsewhere. So I think when you're looking at seeding for Worlds, you also have to look at how faulty the draw system is in the first place, because it really heavily relies on results from a bracket that is pretty punishing and unforgiving, since it's a single elimination and the way that teams are drawn. I mean, it's a good question. I don't think NA will ever lose their pool 1 seed because of marketing reasons. But do I think they quote unquote should? I mean, I think if you're looking at like, okay, what are we thinking about the top teams in the world? I think when you're looking at the World Championship, even despite the fact that it's supposed to be a culmination of everything that happens in the year, you always end up with whoever is the best meta team at the time taking the tournament for the past, like at the very least since 20, I mean, even 2017 was, if you listen to the way teams talked when they were at that tournament, and they were like, okay, Samsung really learned a lot from RNG in terms of how they wanted to play their bot lane through scrims, and that ended up being the dominating meta. And then you had teams like RNG and Samsung trying to approach it the same way the next year and getting beaten out by teams that played to their side lanes like G2 and like Invictus Gaming. And that was the predominant meta. So like you can say that Invictus Gaming wasn't the best team in the world in 2018, but they were the best team for that Worlds. Similarly, in 2019, I wouldn't say FPX were the best team in the world for the most of the year, but they were the ones that ended up winning Worlds. Damwon, you can make an argument that they were the best team in the world for most of the year. Their spring was really rough, but once the jungle meta became kind of more of a carry style, I think you saw Canyon really just take charge of that team and them just be the predominant best team. And I think you're still seeing that right now. So when I look at world seeds, I actually think that it's always going to be the top seeds from China, South Korea, and Europe, looking at what is the best meta team of those. And North America is a little bit behind. I also think that if a North American team was able to, like if you have a really good North American team and you're able to hopefully go to Worlds early and like actually scrim in a different environment against better teams, you will actually end up getting better and shifting. I think we even kind of saw that from Team Liquid at this past year's Worlds, despite the fact that they did not make it out of their group. I think the fact that they were able to adjust their read on the meta, which was so good for play-ins and then so bad for their group, was really interesting and kind of speaks to the fact that if an NA team is able to get that practice, they might be able to be better. I know this is a very rambling answer that like it sounds like I'm avoiding the question, but I'm just trying to provide a lot of context because I think this is something that people don't think of when you're looking at a results-based seeding, which I mean, I don't know of another way to do it, which is another problem with answering these questions because like you're like, well, Emily, how would you do it? And I'm like, I have no expletive deleted idea. So that is my rant about seeds. Do I think NA will lose their seed? No, I don't, because of obvious marketing reasons.
Well, I think there's there are marketing reasons, but I think there are also competitive reasons. I don't think NA is bad enough to completely fall out of that group.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's like you would add another Chinese or South Korean team, probably, if you're also looking at similar results of all 4 major regions at last year's Worlds. Like if you're keeping that as your qualifier, you would be looking to add a team from another major region, not a
there's not another region that would replace NA seed, yeah.
Because like you still look at the way that North America performs compared to what you consider minor regions, and it's still above that. I would be curious to see how Vietnam did at this past tournament. It's kind of really
that's a shame
that we didn't get to see them, but
but it was what it was, and hopefully. I think things are on the right track that we will have a lot more normality by the next Worlds. And then 2 Worlds from now in NA, things will be completely different by then again, and NA is going to win it. So that's, we're on the right track.
Statement.
Nobody can do
That's an interesting statement.
You don't have any specific counter arguments, do you?
And you and everyone to come to practice in NA on NA solo queue, and then like everyone falls to the level of
drag them down to your level and beat them there.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I do actually legitimately. I have a lot of optimism about this year. I don't think that necessarily the level of the LCS is going to be way higher this year than it was last year, but I think the trajectory that it's being set on is absolutely the correct one, and that's going all the way down to what's happening at Academy, what's happening at the amateur level. Very excited about what's going to be going on at the Proving Ground circuit and all of that, and the way that's going to bleed into the LCS over the next few years, right? Not just within 2021.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think for sure the level is going to initially be lower, right? But people should honestly expect that. Like I said, you should accept that as a baseline, and then moving forward from there, talk about how improvements happen, whether you see visual improvements from week to week from these teams and these players. But yeah, do expect the initial, this lock-in tournament, but then also the initial few weeks of LCS to be pretty rough, because you do have teams like I pointed out, like Golden Guardians, who these players will not have been in a lot of these situations before in their like academy or collegiate careers. And so, or even careers in other regions, which is another reason why I'm actually really curious to see how Jose Diodo does, because he has been used to having a team that plays around him, and his pathing at Worlds was, again, like I'm making a lot of judgments based on what I saw from him at Worlds, because I didn't have time to go back and watch a lot of his games in region, but from what I saw, like it's pretty selfish, because they're like, okay, you are very obviously our best player. We're going to play around you. And I'm curious to see whether that continues when he's on FlyQuest or how that team's going to do, because they look really uncoordinated.
Yeah. I think with situations like that, I think the average level of the LCS will probably come down a bit. But I do actually still think the top 2 or 3 teams in the LCS might end up being better than what we had in 2020. So there's the potential that we could get the best of both worlds there, right? Where the overall league is developing forward, but the top end is actually going to be an upgrade. But maybe not. That's so way too early in the season to say that. But
yeah,
time will tell. The classic throwaway line, time will tell. Well, Thank you very much for joining me on the show today, Emily. What is the best way for people to follow your work?
Probably just follow me on Twitter. Obviously, I'm on the analyst desk, but I don't know, I never know like exactly when I'm going to be on there until I receive my assignments. So, look out for me on there, but you can also follow me at League of Emily on Twitter for any other ramblings. And sometimes I post LPL jungle pathing spreadsheets, and maybe I'll start posting my NA ones too. So
great. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/oracle-elixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot more. Links for all of those things and for Emily's Twitter will be in the show notes. This has been the True Sight podcast with Emily Rand, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thank you for listening.